Very excited to have with us the esteemed Dr. Pape on this issue. And then I have 10 questions for Dr. Pape. Each of them are a decolonial theme. And oftentimes there are very classical narratives that are there that are still fully functioning. And oftentimes there are very mischievous resorts to dishonest reasoning called fallacies. Very classical discussion of fallacies that have been taken away from their context and have turned into this calculative knowledge that is unfortunate. That's one of the projects that I'm working on. My upcoming book is on fallacies and the logic of war. Another thing that is very close to my heart and something that Dr. Pape has experienced extensively. Again, Professor Pape has been probably a legend in this, perhaps not in a good way, but it's the smears, the amount of smears that happen when you actually confront fallacies and certain myths. As an ongoing mass suffering is taking place. So I think it's inseparable, the idea of the scholar being smeared from the idea of debunking the myths that are committing and contributing to the logic of mass suffering at hand. So that's why I have a definition of live colonialism, and I'm going to read it for you here, which I made a little bit of a change. So when it comes to thinking about and analyzing mass suffering, especially when and as it is taking place, we rarely tend to the urgency of examining the structures of reasoning that are paving the way for it. This is understandable given how corporeal anguish in mass suffering, such as war and occupation, creates a distinct hierarchy of urgencies, with death and casualty being its main concerns. However, it would be a mistake to deem the examination of the reasonings that nourish the structures of mass suffering as non-urgent. It is, in fact, the structures of reasoning that oppressive operations rely on to ensure legitimacy and sustenance. And this is the part that I think both Dr. Pape and I were excited about tackling in this panel is subsequently and in tandem with analyzing conceptual structures leading to suffering as urgent is the idea of the responsibility to do so. This is where the apprehension of the panelists dwells. We define this responsibility as the obligation to call out as hypocritical the very reasonings and conceptualizations that are presented to justify mass suffering while, and this is an important clause, while embracing the ever-present risk of smears, an obligation that must be fulfilled by those who have the intellectual wherewithal to do so, namely philosophers of education, historians, and etc. So with this in mind, this year's Decolonial Studies SIG proposes a panel with a historian of colonialism as the main speaker, who's going to be interviewed by yours truly. The historian for this panel is the esteemed Dr. Ilan Pappe, whose work has addressed the long-lasting harm that the distortion and manipulation of history can entail, namely promoting oppression and protection of colonialism and occupation, perpetuating conflict, and leaving little hope for the future. Pappe's work is premised on how the tacit acceptance of myths or presenting them as indisputable truths can subtly cast doubt on the colonized people's moral right to land. So Dr. Pappe will be interviewed by me, whose research, I'm going to introduce myself, and public engagement deals with these issues that analyzing the rhetorical and epistemic moves that provocateurs and pro-war analysts make to justify mass suffering, problematizing the often stylized and mathematical nature that fallacies have been dealt with, to the point of what Heidegger would call calculative reason, and calling attention to the responsibility of philosophers to make it impossible to not see injustice, right? The whole goal is for you to, through your pedagogy, to make it impossible to not see injustice through crafting a responsible pedagogy. So I have 10 questions for Dr. Pappe, and I'll be referring to a lot of your own work, Dr. Pape, here. So I'll be reading, so you'll be hearing your own paragraphs here. Before starting, I just want to say that the book 10 Myths About Israel, I think it's a fantastic philosophical resource for looking at the way dishonest reasoning can sort of like find its way into our imagination and how that dishonest reasoning can actually cause harm. So and as we can see, I tried to tease out the philosophical themes from the book that I read, and I highly recommend it as a course book. Again, while embracing the smears. So keep that in mind. But I think this book in particular is such a concrete way into the abstract discussions of decolonization that it cannot be overlooked. All right. So that being said, let's get started.